Hi, everyone. Thanks for being with us tonight. My name's Alicia, and I'm the Director of Film Development at Revelations Entertainment under Lori McCreary and Morgan Freeman. I'm also a very proud member of both the Producers Guild and its inclusion initiative, One Guild. The Producers on Producing series is a part of an ongoing set of events highlighting diversity and inclusiveness in our entertainment. The WGA Writers with Disability Committee, Producers Guild Diversity and Inclusion Committee, and One Guild have all made tremendous strides in highlighting the important voices within our industry. We're excited that we are able to join forces this evening with the writer and producer-centric conversation, shining a light on our talented industry colleagues with disabilities. In your program, you're going to see a list of incredible people who helped put this together, but I do want to give special thanks to the WGA Director of Inclusion and Equity, Terry Lopez, WGA Writers with Disability Chair, Alan Rucker, One Guild Chair, Lori McCreary, PGA Diversity and Inclusion Co-Chairs, Lisa Kors and Dan Halperin, and Media Access Awards Chair, Deborah Calla, who is wearing 3 hats this evening as both a WGA and PGA member and as our fantastic moderator for this evening. Lastly, I want to give a sincere thanks from the PGA to our sponsor, Cast & Crew, for being a supportive sponsor of this evening's event. Cast & Crew provides payroll and related services to the entertainment industry. Through technology advancements, they're committed to delivering the industry's best production software solutions. With the PGA, they're proud supporters of the greater diversity and inclusion across the entertainment industry. If you didn't get a chance to meet the lovely ladies in the corner over there, please say hello after our panel. We have a brief 30-minute reception afterwards with beverages and tasty snacks in the lobby. Now for what you really came for, please help me in welcoming our panelists and our moderator, starting with Deborah Calla, who has chaired and produced together with Alan Rucker the Media Access Awards, an awards event founded by Norman Lear and Fern honoring people in the entertainment industry who have advanced the portrayal and employment of people with disabilities. She served as the chair of the PGA Diversity Committee from 2004 to 2018. Sorry about that. And in this position, she's helped create several programs, including the PGA Diversity Masters Workshop, an 8-week producer boot camp that takes place in the summer. This is a total plug, as we are accepting applications starting January 21st, and it's open to both members and non-members. Our first panelist of the evening is Katherine Beattie, who has worked in television for over a decade. She's held various assistant jobs on shows for outlets such as Showtime, ABC, and Freeform, before landing at NCIS New Orleans, where she served as the script coordinator before moving up the ranks. She now serves as an executive story editor on season 6 and regularly travels to New Orleans to produce episodes. Next up is Glenn Mazzara, who is a phenomenal television showrunner whose most recent works include A&E's series, Damien, AMC's record-breaking series, The Walking Dead, and he created series Crash, the first scripted drama on Starz. Mazzara is a co-chair of the WGA's Inclusion and Equity Group and has been working to improve television employment opportunities for writers of diverse backgrounds. Brandon Saunier is a brilliant filmmaker who at the age of 20 became one of the youngest individuals ever to have a feature film premiere at the Sundance Film Festival. In 2011, Saunier teamed up with fellow writer-producer Brandon Margolis. The diverse and versatile writing-producing team are entering their 2nd season as creators and showrunners of Sony and Spectrum's original Bad Boys spin-off series, LA's Finest, starring Jessica Alba and Gabrielle Union. And lastly, but definitely not least, Tim Zajaros, a producer and co-founder of Armory Films, a Los Angeles-based film and finance production company that creates, develops, produces, and finances high-concept and commercially viable content. With an impressive background of content which includes current projects like Charlie Day's directorial debut, El Tanto, and The Peanut Butter Falcon starring Shia LaBeouf, Dakota Johnson, and Zach Gottsagen, and Netflix's record 4 Academy Award-nominated Dave Reese directed feature, Mudbound. Please give it up to our panel.
So I'm really excited to be here with these fabulous people tonight because we have writers and producers, and between us, we can really change the way media is produced, and we can really change content. So hopefully we can talk some about what is that needs to change, and most importantly, how we can change that. So much has been said about inclusion of all minorities in media, but for some reason, disabilities is often left outside the conversation. Although people with disabilities make up the largest group of any minority in the country, actually in the world. In the United States, there are 61 million Americans living with a disability. That's 1 out of 5 Americans. That's including people with physical and intellectual disabilities. So not only it is the responsible thing to do to create content that includes people with disability, but there is also an incredible amount of storytelling that is being left outside of content being produced. And third, there is a lot of money that we're not making by creating stories about the disability experience. $490 billion is available of disposable cash is available after tax from the 61 million Americans. So why is that we are not talking about and creating content that involves disability? And I'm going to start with Glenn, because Glenn, I am so in awe of Glenn, because Glenn is really... Oh, how much? I'll work for less. Glenn is one of the most vocal people about inclusion of all minorities in media. And we were just, talking in the green room, and here's like a white male. So what makes him really go out and advocate for inclusion of people of color, of different, sexual identities, people with disabilities? So do you have any thoughts about why people with disabilities are so often left out of the conversation of inclusion?
Well, first of all, thank you for your kind words. I will say that I think it's ignorance. I don't want to give people a pass. I think people are uncomfortable talking about disabilities. I think people are afraid, there's an education process, and very often when people need to learn about something, they don't, they shy away from it. They just, sweep it under the rug or whatever, and so things get forgotten. So, regarding, say, writers with disability, I remember I went into the committee and we had a conversation, and I was surprised to learn that very often writers were not hired into writers' rooms, which seems like that would be a great environment. But people often say, well, you can't cover set, so therefore I'm not going to hire you. And there's this assumption about people. I think I've heard that there's a lot of fear when you have a character with a disability. People are saying, well, are we then saying that if that person turns out to be the bad guy, or that person makes a mistake, are we saying something about all disabled people, all people with disabilities? So I think it's just people are really afraid to have conversations and to ask questions, and what is the right nomenclature for certain conditions and all of that. And I just think that it's fear, and it's a shame. It's very easy to correct. I don't want to hog the mic, but I just shot a pilot. I had 3 characters with disabilities in it. It was very easy to write them. It was very easy to cast them. There's a lot of people out of work needing work, and you just have to educate people and have them set the tone. It's a very, very correctable issue.
Katherine, you are a writer with a disability. You are a writer in a very successful show, NCIS New Orleans. Can you share a little bit about what was your, sort of your journey into becoming a hired writer in terms of, first of all, your interviewing process, accessibility, and do you feel that you've had to overcome discrimination, or if you can talk a little bit about that, because that goes to what Glenn was talking about, the fear of producers, showrunners to actually hire or even ask the questions like, can you do this?
Right. Well, if I can just to add to what Glenn was saying, I think there's two reasons why disabled people are not included in media and storytelling. The first is that people think it's sad. They're like, oh, that's a bummer. Why would I want to include that in my show? But for those of us who are disabled, it's not sad. It's just our life. So most of us aren't sitting around like crying all day because we have disabilities. And another is that in wider society, people are taught to look away from disabled people. They're not, so like they're like, oh, okay, I'm gonna look over here because I don't want to be rude and I don't want to stare. So I think that's so ingrained in people, and that's why they don't make that jump, because they're just not even thinking about it. In terms of how I started on NCIS New Orleans, it's an interesting story. I actually was interviewed on FaceTime. So the showrunner hired me and didn't know that I used a wheelchair because he could only see my face. And there was one writer that I'd worked with before that knew I used a wheelchair, and he hired me. We got the layout plan for the office, and I saw that my office was on the second floor, and we had no elevator. So I was like, hey, I don't want to rock the boat, but is there an elevator in this building? Because I use a wheelchair, but if there's no elevator, don't worry about it. It's fine. I'll figure it out. And so I show up on the first day, just walking, and the writer that I had worked with previously thought I was miraculously cured of whatever I had on the previous show. So after an awkward week, she basically forced me to use my wheelchair at work, and I came out to all these people as disabled, and we figured it out. And that was the first season. I'm now the only person who's been on the show the entire time. So now everybody who comes to the show, I'm just there. And it's just what we do. They're like, oh, okay, I guess she brought her own chair. Cool. So yeah, I'm just kind of like an old institution there now. Hopefully they don't get rid of me.
And it's funny that you're talking about accessibility. We know a lot of actors that have to audition, and they get to a casting room, and it's on the second floor, and they're in a wheelchair, and there's no way, obviously, that can make it to the second floor. So many auditions running on parking lots because there's no way to get up there. Or actors that show up that need interpreters, and there are no interpreters, so they can't communicate. Last year I was at a diversity summit, and there was a stage, and the stage was not high enough that an able-bodied person could just step up onto the stage, but the main person speaking at that panel was a little person, and he couldn't get up on stage, and there was not a ramp, and there was not a set of stairs. And so this person, knowing me, asked me to stand in front of him so the audience wouldn't see, and he leaned on me, used my body to climb up. So even before he started to speak, he was already discriminated and made to feel less than. So these are just common sense things that we need to start incorporating in the way we do business, which is making places accessible to everyone that has a physical disability, making, if you are hard of hearing or deaf, that there are interpreters. We are doing the Media Access Awards on Thursday, and we have hired 10 interpreters. So everyone who is there, who is deaf or hard of hearing, not only all the clips have subtitles, but there are people there that will be able to to help them communicate with everyone. The other thing is the tables are not, I'm not putting all people that are deaf or hard of hearing in one table and saying, okay, you know, you're set, I'm moving on, because it's all about networking, meeting others. So these are just logical things to do when we're talking about inclusion, and it should be second nature to everyone, because again, 61 million people have some kind of disability, and they are as complex, interesting as anybody else, and everybody should have the right to live life as everybody else. And it's just easy to, if we think about it, it's easy adjustments for that. Brandon has just joined the only has just joined the only group that any one of us can join at any point in our lives, which is the disability community. And so you are a showrunner. You've gone through, you know, just doing your work. Don't know if you've thought about disabilities or not, but now here you are on the other side. Is that something that you think more about it, and has that impacted your ability to actually be a showrunner?
I'll start at the beginning of that. I did not think about it before. Not to sound like an asshole, just it's not a thing you think about till it's a thing you think about. Like, I had 2 feet. I jumped up and went about my job, and then one day I was in a hospital and they were telling me we're going to have to cut it off. And even then, you don't realize what that means. You don't realize that tomorrow I'm going to wake up and I can't stand up. What do I do now? I'm going to get to work in a few weeks and I can't take the stairs. I can't walk around on the set. All those cords I used to step over become a real problem. So it's not something that I was aware of until it was something that it became the only thing I was aware of. It became every moment of every day, how am I going to take my next step? So, you know, I think that's part of the problem at the top was it's just not on people's minds until something tragic happens, until something changes your life. And then you realize in hindsight, well, maybe it's not so tragic. Maybe I can continue to do the things that I was doing before, but it's going to take things like this and talking to other people about being prepared for when it happens to you, or helping out the guy that it's going to happen to tomorrow, which became me.
And do you find that now having a disability, does that impact your ability to perform in any way?
It does not impact my ability to do my job as a showrunner at all. The results side, it does impact the effort that I have to put into doing it and the amount of communication that I have to have with the people around me to say, this is what I need. Here's how I'm going to do my job to get to the part where you do your job. So it has caused me to have to think about things in a different way, to have to remember that the people around me don't, you know, when I roll this pant leg down, I can walk around, it looks like I have 2 feet. Doesn't matter how much I hurt or if I can actually lift it up, or some days there are days that I can't put the leg on and I gotta, you know, go to work with the crutches or the wheelchair. They don't know that. All they know is they see me standing there. So unless I tell them, hey guys, you gotta move all the stuff because that's where I gotta sit, they don't know. And that's, you know, it's a little thing like that, but never thought about that before. Now it's every conversation I have.
Tim, you just produced a film, The Peanut Butter Falcon, and it's, you know, it's an amazing film. I don't know the budget of it, but I know you guys made over $20 million, so it's doing really, really well for an indie film. And you know, the 2 writer-directors had a script, and one of the main characters is a character with Down syndrome, so they came to you and said, hey, we've got this film, and one of the three main characters has Down syndrome, and guess what? That character is already cast and is a person with Down syndrome. Did you have any hesitation in terms of like, well, will this actor be able to withstand, a shooting schedule? And is that this actor actually going to be able to work with Dakota Johnson and Shia LaBeouf? Thank you. So, which were not cast, but I mean, you would have to cast two other actors. So, were you like hesitant? Did you think, oh, maybe we can get someone to not be Down syndrome, but something else, or? And were there specific specific things that you had to do to accommodate this actor?
The short answer was we probably should have been a little more concerned in the beginning, but we weren't. I was sent 3 scripts, and the middle one said the Peanut Butter Falcon. I'm like, what the heck? I was like, what is this? And then the log line, it was the log line of film about a young man with Down syndrome that breaks free from a nursing home to pursue his dream of being a professional wrestler. And I was like, oh my God, I got to read this one. So it got me excited. And then there was a proof of concept that the guys did. So basically, Tyler, one of the writer-directors, he acted in the movie. He did basically Shia's role in the proof of concept, and basically they just acted out a few scenes. So we were able to see Zach act ahead of time, and we just saw it. We were like, oh my God, this is gold. We love this. We never even thought for a second to cast anybody else because, I thought the uniqueness and the authenticity of casting somebody in that role that has the ability to do it was like, that's what made it so unique and so special. So that never crossed our minds. And the fact that we saw him do it in the proof of concept was enough for us to say, okay, let's make the movie. After we said let's make the movie, then we're like, well, hopefully he's the lead in the movie. Hopefully he can do this for 35 days straight on set all day. And where there were some challenges. He would get tired on occasion, but when you're working 12 to 14 hours, I think everybody gets a little tired. And I think sometimes the actors, even when they start to get tired, you should probably go give them a rest. But we gave him the rest, and he would always come back, and we'd get back into it. But that was really the only issue, I guess you could say, is occasionally getting tired. But he's such a beautiful person, and what he's able to, because he's always like in the moment. He is always there, always present, never in his head. So from an acting standpoint, that's like what you dream of in an actor. So it was better for all the other actors because they had to stay in the moment, because if they went off script at all and they said something else, he would react to that authentically. So I just think that's part of the reason why the movie is so wonderful and the performances are so wonderful, because he had the ability to do something that most actors struggle to be able to do. So for us, it was more of a blessing than anything else.
And in terms of financing, you had to go out and say, hey, we want to do this film where, the lead character has Down syndrome and the actor has Down syndrome. How did you sell that?
Well, it was our company financed it, so we went to our investors and we were just like, we got to do this movie. And the last time we said that was with Mudbound. We were like, we need to do this movie. It's really risky. Everybody else is passing on it, but it's something you got to do. And they said, okay, fortunately.
And then one thing that it concerns producers always was your insurance package, was it more expensive because you had a person with a disability or not?
Honestly, I'd have to ask. I don't think so. I didn't even inquire because it really wasn't that important. If you're talking about a couple dollars, it couldn't have been that much more. even if it was more at all?
I can actually speak to this. So we did the guide that Deb and Ellen and a couple of other people worked on, and one of the questions was, does having disabled people on your cast or crew raise your insurance? I was like, what? Why would it do that? So I went to my line producer and I asked him the question, and he was so confused. I work on the show. Chill Mitchell works on the show. He's a paraplegic. We have several other disabled people on the crew. And he was like, no, like, do you guys eat more food? I don't know why. So at least for our show, we're a giant production on CBS. Like, it's not a concern, and it doesn't raise our budget at all.
But it's something that needs to be, it's like, does your insurance go up? No, it doesn't. Okay.
Yeah, just ask the question.
So talking about asking the question, so ADA does not allow certain questions to be asked when you are interviewing a person with a disability. So if you are interviewing someone for a writer's job, you can't ask them, what is your disability? But so how do you get around asking questions that may impact your production? So some suggestions we have is make sure that when you are interviewing actors or writers for a position, that whatever questions that you ask are asked of all actors and writers being interviewed for the same position. So you're not discriminating, you're asking the same questions. In the case of a writer, you'll be asking, one good question to ask is, why do you think you are the right writer for the show? What do you bring to the show that is unique to you? And this way, the writer has the ability to then share with you why do they think they, have something to contribute on the show. When you wrote an episode that you are actually getting a Writers Guild of America West Evan Summers Memorial Award at the Media Access Awards. And it's called In Plain Sight, and all the characters have a disability or focus on a group of actors with disabilities, characters with disabilities that are played by actors with disabilities. How did you cover the set, which is a question that is always brought up, like, will this person be able to cover the set?
How did I cover the set, or how on that episode did we handle all of the disabled people?
Well, on that episode, then how did you handle all the disabled people?
Well, first, how I cover set, I just figured out. I think two things about disabled people is we adapt every day, so we're used to adapting to situations, and also we're like notoriously underemployed. I think the unemployment rate for the disabled community is about 80%. And it's not because we can't work, it's because we can't get the job, and we want the job. So like, give us the job and we'll figure out how to make it work. So it's not a problem for me. I just do it. In terms of things we needed to change to work on that episode, Chill Mitchell works on almost all of our episodes, and he is a paraplegic. So our cast and crew is very used to working with disabled people. We just needed to get a few more accessible vans and accessible restrooms. There are no accessible trailers in the state of Louisiana. So they get Chill's trailer from Texas. That's the only one. I could get into the writer's trailer, but I choose not to because I don't want to possibly injure myself. So when I'm on set, I don't go to the trailer. I could raise an issue and be like, I demand a trailer, I'm a producer, but like that seems like a bad move. So we had a couple other actors that could not access trailers, and we just found other dressing rooms for them, places to put them. We just made sure we had air conditioning, and we talked to each of the performers and all the background about their specific needs and made sure that they were met beforehand. We had a lot of logistics meetings. At the end of the day, it was super easy. I think everybody except me and our first AD's father is a full-time wheelchair user, so the two of us were like I showed up and I'm like, I don't know why everybody's stressing, but then I forgot, like, this is not their everyday. This is, so we just did it and it was fine. And Kurt was there. They can speak to it. It was, Kurt did an awesome job in our episode. You guys should all watch it. iTunes, Amazon. Yeah, so we just, all the disabled people just showed up and worked, and everybody else was cool and just made sure we had what we needed.
So, you wrote this episode, and there was a lot of specificity about disabilities. Do you think that a writer who does not have a disability could have gotten that level of specificity? No. Why not?
There's so much nuance that you don't even think about unless it is your experience. One of the main themes is that, the main idea of the episode is that these disabled people are being used as spies because nobody looks at them because they're disabled. And the idea for that episode came from, I used to sneak alcohol into concerts using my wheelchair because nobody asked me to get up out of my wheelchair because they think I'm paralyzed. So if that's not your experience, I don't think you're going to go there. So just on the very basic story level, it's not something that people think about. But then also on an emotional level, I truly believe if you don't have writers and performers that have that experience, you're just not going to get the level of nuance that you would if you included disabled people in that.
Glenn, you mentioned that you just work with 3 actors with disabilities. Do you think that, I don't know what the part's called for, but do you think that they brought something that was really special or specificity to those roles that could not have been done by actors that were able-bodied playing people with actors with disabilities?
I do. I mean, we just, shot the pilot, and it's an adaptation of a Stephen King novel. So one of the characters is mentioned as having a disability. The other 2 characters are not. But I started thinking about their backstories, and one of them is like a veteran, Western gunslinger. So I was like, well, that guy could be injured, and so we found somebody who was disabled, and he had an accident or whatever. So he had really he did a lot of work on his character, and then it showed on screen. I mean, he's only in a few scenes, but it really worked, And then we had another character, similar thing. And that character used a wheelchair, and it just worked. It just added specificity and authenticity, and especially since this is, the Dark Tower, so it's a fantasy world, right? And to ground it with people, with individuals having real experiences, you never really see like hobbits in wheelchairs, so it just it doesn't feel real. You know what I'm saying? So to just say, okay, well, these are the townsfolk and everyone has an individual experience, it made the world more grounded, and I think a lot of that had to do with some of those choices. And so I really felt like that was important because those people were playing, townsfolk, and so it just, and the other thing was it made the crew feel good. We shot in Croatia, and I think that they were not used to seeing performers with disabilities, so it made them feel like they were part of something that was interesting, and it just and like you said, people are not getting jobs, so people are really excited and they just throw themselves into the work, and it was really just very normalized and relaxed, and especially when you're shooting a pilot and tension can be high, to have people enthusiastic and yet relaxed and playful, that was a great experience.
You mentioned normalizing, and that's something that I think every minority group is after, normalizing their existence, not, just creating an environment where you are just a person, and you're, a person with the disabilities, or you're Black, or you're Hispanic, or and you are not made to feel different. And unfortunately, usually in the case of people with disabilities, when the stories come up, they're usually a person with disabilities is a drunk or a drug addict or a holier than thou. You know, it's like they know the secret of life, and we should all, listen to what they say because they've overcome so much. And so also the stories that we tell are really important because there is a term called inspiration porn that is a term from the disability community, which means that their existence in a story is there only for the enlightenment of the able-bodied community. Like, again, you're so wonderful that you've overcome all these difficulties, and thus I should feel better about myself. Tim, how do you think we can get past these two very narrow-sighted, minded types of storytelling?
Well, first, I think we have to find. I mean, it's. I'm not going to say it's easy to create these sort of stories, but I think they are creatable. It starts with the people at the top that actually will say, "Hey, let's go make this." If I'm talking television, it's a network or a studio, and even on the film side, it's the same thing. It all starts from the top. I mean, you can attempt to do it from the bottom, but until the people at the top start actually, they all talk about inclusion, and it's the new thing to ride, but they're really not necessarily doing anything about it. They're just talking about it. At least that's what I'm seeing, and it was really frustrating and I shouldn't say frustrating, because I don't want to sound bitter with our film, but we thought we made a really great film, and it played pretty much everywhere. But it started in the festival circuit. We were turned down by most of the big festivals, which didn't really make a lot of sense to us because we knew the movie plays, so it couldn't be because the movie was a bad movie. It must have been something else. And speaking to Glenn's point earlier, I think it was very fear-based. Is this going to be something that they're going to say that we were glorifying or somehow shining a negative light on people with Down syndrome, which didn't make a lot of sense either because Tim Shriver was an EP on the movie. He's the founder of the Special Olympics. Anthony Shriver are best buddies, and then Michelle Whitten, who is the founder of Global Down Syndrome Foundation. Anyway, we got turned down. We ultimately went to South by. We won the audience award. We had started with 3 screenings, had 8 screenings. The reviews were off the charts, and then it was crickets from the distributors. We were getting like not so great offers. They're like day and date. No, this movie's not going to work. There's not an audience for it. And again, it didn't really make a lot of sense to us because the movie played so well everywhere. So ultimately, we found a partner on Roadside, and then helped them to raise more money for P&A and put it out ourselves because we were just like, we were hoping we were right, but we were like, I don't know how the powers that be are not seeing the potential in this movie. What they are seeing as an obstacle, we are seeing as an opportunity. And again, they ride the inclusion bus all day long, but then never really follow through with it. Fortunately, and again, we're not bitter because our journey was our journey, and we got to where we got to however we were supposed to. And we're blessed with the success, but we were fortunately right. And now we're the #1 indie release of the year. But I look back and I'm like, at the people at the top, how did they not see this? What were they so afraid of? And hopefully that will change. So, I mean, to answer your question, I think it needs to start from the top. The people at the top need to start saying, hey, let's start looking for stories, because this one was great. this is a great one, and it was authentic, and it was real, and it wasn't trying to be something on purpose. You know what I mean? Like over trying.
That's what's, I mean, if you haven't seen the movie, go see the movie. But what's so wonderful about this movie is the fact that there is a kid who has a dream, and he's gonna go after his dream, and he, ends up meeting up with two other people, and they all go support him achieve his dream, and in that coming together, they change their lives. There's nothing, there's nothing like, oh, he's got Down syndrome, and, we have to be careful about this. It's just a completely normalized situation. So that's like an amazing, great example of how these stories can be told in just a normal human condition relationship. And it's well told, and you leave and you feel so great about yourself, and because it's just, it's a fun story, not because of anything else except that you leave thinking, wow, when people come together, they can really make shit happen.
Tim, what were they afraid of? That's what
I don't know. I mean, it doesn't. We
politely reject your obviously very feel-good movie.
I don't know. We never really got an answer to that. I still don't know. All we know is, just a lot of closed doors. So we had to open our own. Like I said, the reactions that we got, the reviews that we got. I mean, it just seemed like, okay, somebody should see this. But there had to be a fear. I don't know what the fear is. Hopefully, the result of this film will change that fear. But we can only hope.
I wanted to add something because I'm in a film called Turnover that I'm also a co-producer on. And hi, I'm Kat Kramer. I just wanted to congratulate you on the Peanut Butter Falcon.
Thank you.
We have 2 Down syndrome actors and a deaf actress and deaf talent in Down syndrome all throughout the film. We've won every single indie festival, and we had limited distribution, but we've had an even bigger struggle than you have getting anything substantial distribution-wise to get the film out there, and yet we've won every festival, these really small festivals. So we look to you as an example, but do you think that talking to them and communicating, like you were saying now, is the way to go, or what do you think is the best approach when there seems to be fear but it's unspoken?
I feel like results are really the only thing that they're going to pay attention to. So we were fortunately successful at the box office, so hopefully they start paying attention. Otherwise, I don't know what else. I mean, I don't know how to get through,
I would say just show them his movie. Be like, people came to see this, they'll come to see that. Like, I think that's our big thing is like, we can tell people, oh, people with disabilities can work on a television set. It's easy until we're blue in the face. But I'm like, no, let me go talk to them and let me go tell them that I did it and it's possible. So to your point, I think the more positive results we get, it's just going to snowball and, roll downhill from there.
And there are so many amazing stories that are being left out of the world of storytelling because we don't include stories about people with disabilities or have them participate either in the writing, the producing, the directing, and bring their own experience. And it's funny because it's always like, when you're interviewing for a writer position, it's like, what do you bring to this writer's room that is unique that we don't have? And here's like all these stories that can be brought into a writer's room the same way as a person of color can bring a whole entire experience to a writer's room or a woman or so it's like to really reflect the world that we live in. It's really necessary to have all people participate in the creation of this content, and it does not take away from any other group, and it doesn't and it doesn't hurt any project financially. It's quite the contrary. I don't know why there is this belief that if it's done by mostly men and white men, then it's going to be successful. And if women are involved, or people of color, or people with disabilities, then we don't know. But that's what we can change. And again, as we are writers and producers, we have the ability to change that. One thing that we always say, it's like we can at least start populating the landscape with people that are different from white males, even as extras. Sometimes you have, street scenes and everybody, around is a white male. And why is that? That's not how the world is. And I think it's the fallback position, and it's unconscious bias. But if we can really stop for a second and think, well, women cross the street too. And people with disabilities cross the street too. Why don't we have them? And then we have bit parts, and then we start creating name actors that can then carry a production, because a lot of it is based on, do we have a name on this TV show, or do we have a name on this film? So we can impact and change that by really becoming aware of, we need to think about populating our sets and what we're filming with people with disabilities in this particular case.
Yeah, if I could just speak about that, because one of the things, I'm glad that the Producers Guild is involved in this, because I find that as a showrunner, you get a lot of pressure from creative executives at the studio and the network, and you might have non-writing producers also giving notes. So as you're trying to tell the story, so, say, for example, in the background, we had a man with dwarfism in the background in my show, and immediately he was called out as being distracting. Or we had a guy. So again, this is a fantasy world. So we had a black guy who had an afro, and they said he's distracting. And I said, well, no, he's distracting to you, but if you were black with an afro, you'd feel represented. So, so what happens is you get a lot of pressure. So I don't think it's malice. It's just that the bias is that there's some white middle-aged guy like me watching TV, and I don't watch TV, so nobody has to make TV for me, you know what I mean? But yet it's like that's the default, and so everyone's thinking, well, we don't want to distract the imaginary viewer, at least as far as backgrounds, or it's sad to have that story or something like that. So I think that the executives and the producers who are not the writers are channeling something that is kind of infecting the process. Now, yes, showrunners have a lot of work to do, and writers have a lot of work to do, or whatever, but we have to look at the entire system of how everything gets made.
Well, that's why we're so excited about really doing this panel and bringing writers and producers, because as if we talk about this, we can do something about it. And it's a very outdated thinking. I mean, come on, the world is not white anymore, or ever was, and there are more women than men in most societies. So what are we talking about here?
Even something like this panel, in our casting, we are committed to diverse casting. We have a disclaimer that goes out with all of our casting notices. And so what that means is that I get black and Hispanic people and occasionally an Asian person. But there's no understanding of that also includes disabled people. It includes everyone. So I have to, as a showrunner, remember to say, I get it. I got Hispanic women and black women for this role. Is there anyone else? Is there anyone, out there that maybe someone in a wheelchair? That's the kind of thing that I just learned because it's now happened to me.
Well, let me ask, do you feel that's a problem with your casting director? Not to call anybody out, because I find casting directors are interested in bringing in other people, but they feel that they're not going to be well received. So where do you feel is the breakdown?
I think it's just that it's not on their mind. And I've had the same issue with multiple casting directors. I've just noticed it now.
Right.
But I think it's just, when you say the word diverse, it hits a few boxes for them, and they hit those few boxes, and then they have done their job. Right. And I love our casting people. I just think it's something that needs to be talked about more so that we understand more, and they do think, oh yeah, that's right, I can think outside the box on even what diversity means.
So going back to the writer, if the writer writes on that page, a person of color, a person with a disability, that gives the casting director the power to then go out and get that actor. So it's like really, really important that we all become very conscious about the way we write, and until the day we no longer need to be specific about roles and characters, and then the best actor gets the role. But we're so far away from that it's even in a crowd scene, sort of being specific of how do we want to populate that crowd scene is really, really important. I actually want to ask Giselle, who is sitting here, who is, you were on Quantico, right?
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about your experience in the writer's room as a person who is hard of hearing?
Okay, so I'm deaf, and I went in, I had my meeting with my showrunner, and I got hired. And a couple of days before the room started, the showrunner sent me an email. He said, I ordered a monitor for you. Is that okay? I figured that you could sit next to the writer's assistant, and that way you could see what the writer's assistant's writing, and that way you could communicate with the room. And that was great. I hadn't thought of that. It was something that happens often to me is that I say I'm deaf, and people will start signing. They'll remember whatever they learned in like sign language club in middle school, and I don't sign. I read lips. So if somebody discloses something to you, they say that they have a certain disability, a great thing to do is ask, what do you need to do your job, as opposed to assuming. And then I can tell you, I read lips, I just need to sit close to people, I sit at the front. And then we don't have that awkward moment where you start to sign and I don't know what you're saying. I had a great experience in the room. I don't know if there's anything specific that you want to...
No, just, here you are, as a deaf writer, and you worked on a network show, so it's a major accomplishment. And, how was, just to share, how was that for you? And the fact that someone said, hey, I don't care, she's writer. What do you think you brought to Quantico that made you write for the show, the writer's room?
Well, what did I bring? Before I became a writer, I was an epidemiologist. I worked in biodefense. So I think I brought a lot that a lot of writers couldn't bring. The showrunner also hired Marley Matlin as a deaf character. She was overseas regular, so I could write to her character. So I feel like I brought a lot.
Can I just, off of something that Giselle said, it's really nice if you are working with somebody who is disabled to ask them what their access needs are and not just put the burden on the disabled person to always tell you, because we're often forced to advocate for ourselves, and it's just so refreshing when somebody asks.
I've actually talked to the line producer for The Good Doctor, and they have an incredible amount of actors with disabilities and writers with disabilities working on that show. And two things really stuck with me was one, David Short said that, once you meet someone in a wheelchair, he particularly, I'm paraphrasing, but he said, you meet someone in a wheelchair, you see the wheelchair, and then you spend an hour with that person and you see the person. So that was one thing that really I will always remember because it was so well put. And then his line producer was like, if we get a writer who has a disability, we don't give a shit if that writer is whatever his issue is. It's like, is he or is she a good writer? That's what we care about. Can we work with that person? And then the next thing, once that writer is hired, then we introduce them to our transportation captain, to our first AD, because these are the people that are going to have to accommodate the writer, the actor, and it's about logistics. The same, any production has logistics. What are the logistics that we need to tend to accommodate that writer or that actor? And they will bring a uniqueness to that show, which is their own personal experience that nobody else can. So it's like it's an easy thing. I hire someone and then ask them, how can I help you best perform your job? Is it, getting a large monitor and sitting you next to the writer's assistant? Is it, sort of making sure that all rooms that are, accessible, wheelchair accessible? Do you need an interpreter? What do you need to best do your job? Because if you do your job best, then I get to, reap the benefits of your work.
I'm just wondering why you give men in white power that excuse. I mean, we've had a black president, we had a female prime minister, the guy who just took Kaiser everywhere to where he was. Kaiser just died, and he's only 60, and he's a black guy. I mean, I don't know why it's not called out for what it is. I mean, all the shows I was the first black female writer to work on a Star Trek. But my second job I got because two white men, Bob Isley and Kevin Droney, made a bet that they could get me a job sight unseen without anybody reading my script. And I got that job on the Burning Zone. And that is how most white people get their jobs. So, I mean, all this stuff about unconscious bias, we don't really see, as you are because you're black. That's just a cop-out. So why don't you call it what it is?
I think that and I think that obviously it's changing, but there is something that happens when you, and I'm not making any excuse for anybody, but people tend to work with people they know. And so it's like you get a pilot, you get a show, and you want to work with your friends because they know they have your back. And usually you come up through the ranks with people that are similar to you, and it's hard. And again, I'm not making any excuses. I'm just saying that's where the, sort of the term unconscious bias comes from. You end up hiring people that look like you and think like you because it's just, fast and, and unless you tell people, this doesn't work, you're losing out on amazing stories and points of view that are not enriching your work. That person may not think about it.
Yeah, can I say something? I do agree with you. I feel that unconscious bias does give us a pass, okay? And unconscious bias to me is when someone is just not necessarily being malicious, but not doing the work, not thinking, okay? I will say that there is a tremendous amount of racism and sexism, okay? I've been talking about this for years. This gets said by writers. I think that there's a tremendous amount of racism against black writers. I feel like that's just something that Hollywood is not dealing with, okay? So, I think you're right. I don't mean to say like, oh, to give people a pass or whatever. I mean, I think that a lot of white guys are worried about being called out. I think they're shutting down. I think they're pulling away from this discussion. I think that's a terrible mistake. But, it's true. I just came from another panel and we were talking about unconscious bias there. And it is a very polite, politically correct pass. And it's not good. And if we look at the exclusion that happens in writers' rooms, and you wrote that into a movie, those would be the bad guys. It's very clear. So I'm not saying anything you don't know. So you're right, and I feel like the unconscious bias discussion is maybe 5 years old. We have to get past it. It feels very dated. So, yeah, I read a guy's script. It's very hard to be a white guy in Hollywood. I don't know if you know this, but every white guy is really terrified they're not going to get a job. And I read this guy's scripts last week. And he's 50, he's white, he can't get a job. I said, send me some scripts. And I said, okay, listen, there are no women in your scripts. You have a black guy on page 17. He doesn't speak till page 29. Your scripts are racist and sexist. And I've never met this guy, so I felt very comfortable saying this. And so the guy said, you know what? You're right. He's married to a black woman. He has 3 biracial kids. He's never even looked at his own writing like that. And he said nobody had told him that. So you could say that's racism and sexism in the system, or you could call it unconscious bias, call it whatever the fuck you want. It's just wrong. It is, and I think we're here because we think it's wrong. But I don't know. It's maybe by using that term, sometimes you find somebody.
Yeah.
What is the tolerance for pushing back?
I think that's.
I don't know. I don't have an answer.
That is really changing, but I'm thinking, it has changed, and of course it's not a pass anymore, especially now that we've been talking about this for so long. But I'm thinking about someone like Scott Silveri, who grew up with a brother with cerebral palsy and never thought ever to write a show about disabilities. And he grew up with a brother with cerebral palsy. Just never crossed his mind. And the day it did, he wrote Speechless, which was on the air for 3 seasons. So why, write about what you know, your world, and whatever. And here's someone who is an incredible, nice person, really great writer, and never thought about writing about his own experience. So that's where I think, people just don't think about sometimes. And again, that has, I know you're shaking your head, do you want to hit me? But I think that things are changing, have changed, but sometimes people just don't think about it. And I think that's why it's important for us to be here tonight and any other opportunity to make sure that we talk about this.
But I think it goes back to we're telling the same old stories. So when Glenn said somebody told him that a dwarf in his show was distracting, like that's not distracting. It's because that person probably doesn't see dwarves on TV, and the more we see them on TV, the more we normalize people with disabilities. They're not gonna. That's just gonna be part of the normal landscape of what we see, right? So we just need to keep telling new and different stories.
Right, and so we also have talked less about people with neurological differences and people with autism, Down syndrome, and but right now you have The Good Doctor. Obviously, the lead character, the lead actor portrays a character with autism. So here's the question. This is like the #1 show in the world, The Good Doctor. So the message that's going out is people with autism have the ability to do anything and excel at anything. But it's it's played by an actor who is not in the spectrum. Do you think that this is a good message in the show, being that the lead character has autism but the actor doesn't, or is detrimental? Anybody?
You're like, oh, Katherine really wants to take this one.
Katherine really wants to take this.
I mean, I cannot speak to people that are neurodivergent because I'm neurotypical. But I would say, from my own experience, like if I saw somebody I have cerebral palsy, and if an able-bodied actor was playing a character with cerebral palsy, to me that tells, and if the message is people with cerebral palsy can do anything, which is like an annoying message to put out in the first place, but if that is the message, and I find out that the actor is not disabled, the message that I get as a disabled person is they can do anything except be an actor and play their own experience on television. So I think it's not great.
Yeah, this is interesting. You know, I had a character, like a vet who had been injured and was paralyzed, and I cast an able-bodied actor to play. So, and I cast a guy I had worked with before, a Latino guy. So I was like, okay, I checked the Latino box, but I fucked up on this thing. So, and then I think I heard Alan talking about this and everything. So I was like, okay, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to do better. And then I was talking to Peter Dinklage about this, and he was like, that's ridiculous. It's acting. So I was like, okay, I'm really confused by this, okay? And this is, like, I'm confused. So I think what's been nice, though, about casting actors with disabilities to play, to just cast them, whether or not their character has a disability, is it just adds something to the work. It just adds, like I said before, an authenticity. People are really hungry for the work. You know, people want to be there. You know what I'm saying? People are interested in playing their own experience. I don't know why we can't get past that, because you could at least do the search and see your 40 actors and then cast the best person. So I think at this point, you know, there's really no excuse. I think the internet calls out people. I think so. I mean, listen, I don't have the biggest show in the world, so clearly I'm wrong. But it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel right. You know, what do you guys think?
I mean, yeah, like, look, don't do blackface, but also I didn't mind Gary Sinise in Forrest Gump. Like, I think there.
That was a long time
That's
ago.
true. That was a long time ago. But I feel like it's going to affect everyone differently. And like seeing the autistic character on The Good Doctor, does that help some people? Does it touch some people out there who have autism and say, but he can do it and I can do it, and great. But does it also hurt some people that see that it's played by a non-autistic actor? Yeah, like, we're never going to win this. It's going to be, each thing happens as it happens, and we got to do our best, and we got to see our 40 actors and just go with the best person for that role, because otherwise there's not going to be a show. Because yes, we did our best and we cast an autistic actor, but the show didn't work, and so now there's no show, and now all those kids with autism that were going to watch this guy with autism don't get to see that message. So I'm not going to say don't do it. I'm going to say do your best to find the right actor for the role, and do your best to make it an inclusive process, and then from there you got to make the show.
One thing in defense of The Good Doctor that they have done is cast other guest star roles with actors that are in the spectrum. Now, it's not every episode, of course, but they have reached out and put other disabilities in other roles as well.
Yeah.
But as you said, well, you'll never please everybody, but yet with disability, we're allowing the ability to put on crip face and not letting the largest segment of the population self-represent themselves on television. And going back to one of your other things is, I believe it's education, but I also believe that there is some conscious bias because there's 80% of the population that's temporarily able. Because eventually, we're all going to get to that point where we join the disability club at one way or another through, mobility or whatever.
Yeah.
David?
My question's for Brandon. Thanks. Welcome to our community.
Thanks for having me.
My question for you is that your disability has arrived at a point in your career where you are at the EP showrunner level, and no doubt you experienced and continue to experience racism in the industry, and now you have another ism, but it occurs at a time in your life when you had some measure of authority in a space, and particularly on your own show. And so I'm curious, as someone at like the staff writer, story editor level, and one of very few people in wheelchairs working in television, Katherine mentioned also, that we have to often advocate for ourselves, but at the lower level, that's challenging to do if you don't want to be seen as a table thumper, but you still also have to make a case. Do you have any suggestions for strategies about how to be nice and accommodating, but also get what you need?
I just became disabled, but I have always been black. I never really minded not being nice or accommodating, and I feel like sometimes you just got to say, let me in, and then work really hard to get in and to stay in, and look, harder than the other people, but you just got to look at that challenge, and like someone else said earlier, you always adapt. Like I was always adapting because of who I was before, and then I stepped into this and was like, oh, it's like that but harder, and sometimes not. So it's just about looking at the challenge and saying, yeah, but I'm here, and not worrying about who you offend, because fuck them. And send me your script.
David is a really good writer.
And I just wanted to bring up another topic within disability. Is there are so many people living with invisible illnesses, and so many untapped stories within that community. So whether it's rheumatoid arthritis or Crohn's disease and lupus, and if you put in the hashtag Spoonie, you would, in Instagram or Twitter, you would see probably a million responses to that hashtag, and we are all just, some of us, dying to see our stories represented, and not in just a diagnosis on, I don't know, I feel weird saying the TV show, but Grey's Anatomy or on Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, but just as real people who are lawyers who are just living their lives, and not just in a simplistic way, but in a three-dimensional way. And it is a population that sometimes we are just watching TV a lot, and it goes into that, well, are you disabled enough, or we can't always see it. So it's almost you have to kind of prove yourself that you belong in that category. But I think it's just so important to just bring that also to the forefront of disability, is to include us, because I'm one of that us, into this conversation, because the plethora of stories just among that part of disability could go on for years, especially in this climate.
That was a comment. Well, I wanted to make sure I got you.
Thank you. Hi. I'm actually in SAG-AFTRA leadership, and I had a conversation with some of our leaders on the Performers with Disabilities committees. And I had that question of, what is your feeling on performers who are able-bodied, who are playing roles that are disabled? And their answer to me was, we just want the opportunity to audition, and as long as the best, art wins, great. but not to be excluded from the opportunity to at least participate in those casting calls and that kind of thing. So I love that you brought up the role of the casting director in the process of just being more open-minded about, including those types of performers when that comes up. I also really appreciate this conversation. I wish that the room was packed, because I think there's so few opportunities for us to come together across the different disciplines and have conversations like this. So I just want to applaud you guys for having it. And one question that I just had was, because this goes back to something that you said very early in this discussion, which is, where's the line? And I think, Glenn, you said something about this, but not being condescending by trying to be accommodating and compassionate. Like, how do you handle, not wanting to talk down to somebody, or by trying to be helpful or trying to be accommodating, that you're assuming that they can't do it themselves or that they're not able to, you get what I'm saying? Like, how do you handle that line?
Well, I think it's going back to what you said before. You just ask people, I think it's not making assumptions, okay? I think one of the things that the Writers Guild needs to do is train their showrunners and their producers better about what questions can be asked in a job interview, and then once somebody gets a job, how do you approach this? I mean, there are, laws about, you don't want to discriminate against that, so that's something that we could do better. Okay, just educate people about what's appropriate, what's inappropriate. But then I think just asking somebody, what are ways we can help you, like when I hired those actors, I asked them, what kind of support do you need from our show? And very often they just say, oh, we just need this or that or whatever. It was very minimal. But just to ask that question, and they're supportive, and then, but I would ask that, I think it's just asking people, I mean, you could ask, people who have kids, well, are you, can you work late? I mean, you wouldn't ask that during a job interview, but once you start the room, you kind of have everybody agree on hours or whatever. So it's just a matter of tailoring your workplace to the people working there. And for some reason, that seems to be something we don't really do, If I could just say one thing about the casting director, it's also important, I think, for producers and showrunners to have conversations with the studio and network casting executives. So they have casting departments, obviously, and those people are part of the decision-making process. And I find that networks right now are excited to have their cast be as inclusive as possible. You know what I mean? So they want to see that representation because that's good press for them. So if you can pull them into the conversation, they can be an advocate, and that could help you get past some of the creative execs who might be nervous about some of your casting decisions.
So in defense of casting directors, the Casting Society of America last year went out and throughout the country and put about 16 different locations, about 600 actors with disabilities across the United States, put them on tape so that, for any show that is looking for an actor with disabilities, they could find all kinds of actors in any part of the United States. So there is a real movement and effort from the casting directors to be really inclusive. And in terms of the other question, how do you handle people's needs? I mean, and again, I'm doing this Media Access Awards, and we have people with all kinds of disabilities on stage. So a couple of days ago, I needed to speak to someone waiting for the third double lung transplant, someone who is dying. And so I said, okay, so do you need to, how do you want to get on stage? We have an elevator or steps. And he said, oh, then I want to take the elevator. And I said, do you need help to get to the podium? So it's a conversation. How can I help you do what we are talking about you doing? That's as simple as that. No emotion, no nothing. It's just like your need to do something, and in this particular situation, my job or responsibility is to help you do this something. How can I do that? two people talking.
And then I would also say, if you ask somebody if they need help, take them at their word if they say no. Don't keep offering, because that's when you get into the condescension, right? People know what their access needs are and they know how to handle them. So that's a really good first step. And then also, to your point about actors with disabilities, I feel like people who defend non-disabled actors playing disabled roles always say, well, it's the best actor for the role and acting is acting. But it comes down to the fact that disabled performers aren't getting the opportunities to audition and work and train. So because they're not getting those opportunities, they're not getting the chance to develop their skill. So it's all about giving them the opportunity to audition so they can, first of all, they're already the best actor for the role because they're disabled. But in the wider view of society, giving them the chance to develop their skills so they can become the best actor for the role.
I have a
Two
question
more
about
questions.
language used in a script. Not language that people use that is listed as inappropriate to talk about people with disabilities. So when you're in a script, whether or not the writer is someone who has a disability, if the actors in the script, like, what is the consensus on them using like pejorative language with each other, and is that like not appropriate? Because I know like racially, do you understand what my question is? Like racially, it's like still like I still don't really know the answer to that question. Where if you're a person of color, can you call another person of color as a joke something that's inappropriate that like a white person couldn't do? Like in a script, that this is a real case study of a group of people with disabilities talking to each other based on real people. They use very pejorative language like to each other, like making fun of each other or nicknames. What do people think about that? Is that like, do not go there, or or is that not a realistic depiction then? So.
Personally, I feel like you should write people that sound like people. So if that's how people talk to each other, that's how I would write it.
And is it gratuitous or is it authentic? And if it's authentic, then like we call John Hooks, and because he's got hooks, and that's that.
One thing you could do, and speaking specifically to disability, is like do a sensitivity read, whereas bring in the people with those disabilities and say, would you say that? Is this something you would say, or what would you say, and let them give you suggestions. So.
One thing that I did on my script was one of our characters. I had some trouble defining this, so I said the character in the novel has a mental disability. So I wrote mentally disabled, and I wasn't comfortable using that term, but I didn't know what the right term was or whatever. But we just opened up the casting. We cast an actor with Down syndrome, and once we cast him, then I took out the descriptor. So I just have the character's name and say he's a busboy or whatever, and the actor's mom came up to me and thanked me for doing that because no one else had a descriptor. You know what I mean? So these things kind of work into scripts for certain reasons, but I would just say, take a look at, if you're writing dialogue and it's pushing the characters and it's funny and that's what you're going for, then that's important. But if you don't need it, like every time I look at my script, I'm like, what's the bare minimum I need to write? That's my job as a writer, I think. I want to get out of the way. So, ask like, well, why is this here? And just, is it adding or is it subtracting in some way? Does that make sense?
My name is Jeroen Kaplan. We're in the financing phase for a movie about the 2002 Paralympic sled hockey team that won the gold medal in Salt Lake City. And I know from my research and when I'm talking to our investors, it's like there's 1,000 newspaper writers, bloggers, et cetera, that are going to jump all over this story because we'll be casting people with disabilities to play the roles of people with disabilities. And it's like the top 30 speaking roles in this movie. Do you have a specific way to talk to the investors that I should be like, hey, I mean, to me, it's like this is a gold mine, and I don't know how to speak to the investors exactly to that.
I mean, yeah, they need to look. When we saw, they need to see that as an opportunity again to tell something authentic, and like you said, I think that people want to see these stories told, and to speak to what everybody's been saying. I think, speaking to what you were saying, is the person with the disability should be the best person for that role. Now, and speaking to your point, sometimes maybe they have the disability, but maybe they can't pull it off, so maybe it doesn't work. But in the onset, yeah, they should be the best person for that role, and that's really what you should be casting in any roles anyway, is whoever the best person.
Right. I mean, that's our casting idea. I don't know if you have an idea of like what to say, like why this is so, why it's gonna mean more money for the investor.
I mean, I don't know if it necessarily will. Hopefully it will. I mean, hopefully you're going to have a better movie because you're telling it in an authentic way. You will get recognition from outlets because you're doing it. So you're going to get free publicity. So there is a better chance. And I guess you could just point to ours and be like, hey, it worked for this one.
A lot of people are.
Obi? If you're trying to create authenticity for a hard of hearing character, it might be helpful to bring in the post-production sound designer so that you could play with the world as perceived by that hard of hearing character, who's not just someone to add malapropisms for humor for the episode, but also to show what mistakes he or she might make in not hearing clearly, and what that feels like, what that feels like from the perspective of a hearing audience member.
Last question.
Can I say something?
No.
No. Glenn, can I say? I think it's really important, this whole idea of social interaction with people with disabilities. I know this is going to come as a surprise to you, but people with disabilities do not spend 24 hours a day thinking about their disabilities. They really don't. I don't spend 3 minutes a day except at affairs like this. So the minute you get to that point in her quote where you stop seeing the disability, stop using the disability as some kind of defining frame for this person, you'll probably find a person out there that, also likes the same kind of music you do or whatever, and it just opens the way. You, of course, should spend every minute of your, because you just became paralyzed. It's part of the first two-year plan. I'm sorry. Yeah. But other than that, if he does, he's dead. Anyway, that's all I had to say.
We kind of have to wrap tonight, but people are going to hang out, so you can ask questions. Before we finish, let's just really have our takeaway, which is let's really think about including people with disabilities in the scripts or the casting, even if they're not called for a specific character with disabilities. Let's ask, let's hire people and then ask them just normally, how can I help you do your job? Like any good manager will ask their employees, like, if I don't know how to really see the strengths and weaknesses of my employees, then I'm not a good manager. It's not on the employee, it's on me. And so just let's think about 61 million people in the United States, and let's think especially about $490 billion.
Guys, another round of applause for our amazing moderator, amazing panelists. There is going to be a reception over there. The panelists are going to, some of them are going to stick around a little bit. Just be a little respectful as you guys come up to talk to them. Thank you guys so much. And by the way, please, 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 if you guys love these events, if you want more events like these, please tell your respective guilds. Let us know so we can keep curating these events for you guys. Thank you.